Shortly after the Six-Day War, a new conflict broke out between Israel and Egypt. Although this confrontation did not escalate into a full-scale war, it lasted for several years and came to be known as the War of Attrition. After Israel occupied the Sinai Peninsula, its defensive line extended to the eastern bank of the Suez Canal, and the War of Attrition was primarily fought along both sides of the canal. In October 1967, the Israeli destroyer Eilat was sunk by Egyptian missiles, resulting in 47 deaths and 91 injuries. Israel retaliated by destroying 2 oil refineries near the Suez Canal. Subsequently, both sides engaged in continuous gunfire and artillery exchanges, which sometimes escalated to airstrikes. They also frequently deployed commando units to infiltrate enemy territory for harassment and sabotage operations. Egypt's objectives in launching the War of Attrition were threefold. First, to prevent Israel from establishing the Suez Canal as its border. Second, to boost the morale of its military and civilian population. And third, to inflict casualties on Israel, making the cost of occupying the Sinai unbearable. The War of Attrition between Israel and Egypt lasted from 1967 until August 1970. Israel suffered heavy losses, with over 500 soldiers and civilians dead and thousands wounded. Egypt's losses were far more severe, with thousands dead, countless wounded, and massive economic damage. Ultimately, neither side was willing to continue the attritional conflict. The fragile stalemate. After the Six-Day War, hostility and confrontation between Israel and the Arab states intensified. On one hand, Israel was unwilling to relinquish the occupied territories unconditionally, prompting the Arab states to seek to restore lost lands and national pride through war. On the other hand, the mediation efforts of UN Middle East envoy Gunnar Jarring made no progress, and the Middle East Peace Conference hosted by the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France ended in failure. Both sides remained in a state of neither war nor peace, and the shadow of conflict loomed over the region. The Six-Day War of 1967 also demonstrated the strategic alignment between Israel and the United States in the Middle East. A strong Israel helped the U.S. contain Soviet expansion and counter radical Arab nationalism. As a result, U.S. support for Israel increased significantly after the war. From 1969 to 1972, during the first 3 years of the Nixon administration, U.S. military and economic aid to Israel exceeded the total assistance that all previous American governments had provided to Egypt since Israel's founding. Soviet involvement and the 1972 shift. Meanwhile, the Arab states increased their reliance on the Soviet Union. From early 1968, within 6 months, the Soviets rapidly replenished the military equipment lost by Egypt and Syria during the Six-Day War, exceeding previous levels in both quantity and quality. Large numbers of Soviet military personnel were deployed to Egypt and Syria. By early 1970, the Soviets had provided Egypt with military equipment and supplies worth about $4.5 billion U.S. dollars, and over 20,000 Soviet troops were stationed in Egypt, operating advanced air defense systems. However, a crucial turning point occurred in July 1972, when Egyptian President Anwar Sadat unexpectedly expelled the 20,000 Soviet military advisors. Paradoxically, this move reinforced Israel's belief that Egypt was incapable of waging a modern war without Soviet guidance, deepening Israel's complacency. Israel's static defense and complacency. During the 6 years following the Six-Day War, Israel adopted a static defense strategy under Chief of Staff General Haim Barlev. Along the Suez Canal and the Sinai Peninsula, Israel built the Barlev Line, a 160-kilometer defensive fortification costing $238 million US dollars. In the Golan Heights, Israel constructed 3 robust anti-tank lines designed to prevent and repel Egyptian and Syrian attacks. Following the 1967 victory, The concept of Greater Israel spread in Israeli society, with many advocating permanent annexation of the occupied territories. The nation developed a sense of complacency, known as the Konzeptseia, believing it had sufficient strategic depth, favorable security conditions, and that Arab states were incapable of mounting a serious challenge. Based on this mindset, Israel in 1972 decided to cut military spending, prioritize economic development, and reduce reserve training time. The military, burdened by wide-ranging occupation duties, grew fatigued, and national morale declined, leaving the country in a lax state ahead of the 1973 elections. Arab preparations and deception. On the Arab side, after Gamal Abdel Nasser's death in 1970, Anwar Sadat became president of Egypt. He believed that only a successful war could break the stalemate of neither war nor peace and recover the territories lost in the Six-Day War. The Arab states strengthened internal unity. Oil-producing countries such as Saudi Arabia and Libya provided substantial financial support to frontline states. In early 1973, Arab military leaders met in Cairo, forming a joint command between Egypt and Syria and drafting a limited war plan, which by mid-1973 included a coordinated two-front attack against Israel from the north and southwest. In May 1973, signs indicated that Egypt might launch a war. Israel's chief of staff David Elazar issued a partial mobilization order, but Egypt did not act, causing Israel approximately $11 million in losses and domestic criticism of Elazar. By late September, intelligence revealed Egyptian and Syrian troop movements, but the government remained largely on alert. By early October, the military was on alert, yet most Israelis did not perceive war as imminent. To achieve surprise, Egypt and Syria employed multiple deception measures. At the end of 1972, Egypt spent $4 million constructing a large embankment on the Canal's western bank, ostensibly to defend against Israeli attacks, but actually to conceal artillery and tank concentrations. From early 1973, Egypt repeatedly called up reservists in rotation and conducted frequent diplomatic and military exercises to mislead Israel. During preparations, both sides strictly maintained operational secrecy, issuing orders only hours before combat, while frontline units even staged a facade of peace. The Yom Kippur War begins. On October 6th, Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, all normal activities ceased in Israel, and civilians and soldiers focused on prayer. At 2 p.m., explosions on the eastern bank of the Suez Canal signaled a surprise attack by Egyptian and Syrian forces from the south and north, catching Israel off guard. The Yom Kippur War, the fourth Arab-Israeli war, had begun. With over 250 aircraft and 2,000 artillery pieces supporting them, more than 80,000 Egyptian troops crossed the Suez Canal, breached the Barlev line using high-pressure water cannons, and advanced into the Sinai Peninsula. After a week of intense fighting, Egyptian forces controlled a 10 to 15 kilometers zone east of the canal. Simultaneously, Syrian forces attacked the Golan Heights, advancing toward Israel's Hula Valley in the north and capturing large areas. The tide turns. From October 10th, Israel organized a counteroffensive, concentrating superior forces to halt Syrian advances. By October 12th, Israeli forces recaptured the Golan Heights, crossed the 1967 ceasefire line, and entered Syrian territory within 32 kilometers of Damascus. Israel then shifted its main forces to the southern front. On October 14th, a massive tank battle erupted on the eastern bank of the Suez Canal. Unlike earlier battles, this resulted in a decisive Israeli victory. Egyptian forces lost over 250 tanks while trying to advance beyond their air defense umbrella, while Israeli losses were minimal. On October 16th, under Ariel Sharon, Israeli forces exploited gaps between Egyptian corps to cross the Canal, Operation Gazelle, encircling Egypt's Third Army. The tide of war had reversed. Israel regained the initiative, even threatening Cairo's security. Ceasefire and aftermath. On October 21st, the United States and the Soviet Union jointly submitted a ceasefire proposal to the UN Security Council. On October 22nd, the Council passed Resolution 338. Egypt and Syria accepted the ceasefire on October 22nd and 24th, respectively. Despite the ceasefire, Israeli forces continued facing Egyptian and Syrian troops in a tense standoff, with over 30,000 Egyptians of the Third Army encircled in the Sinai. Under U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger's mediation, Israel and Egypt signed a 6-point ceasefire agreement on November 14th, initiating disengagement negotiations. In 1974, Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy led to a phased disengagement agreement between Israel and Egypt. Israel regained approximately 5.5% of the Sinai Peninsula, but at the cost of deteriorating relations with Syria and other Arab states. Syria also reached a disengagement agreement with Israel in May 1974, establishing a UN-monitored buffer zone. The Yom Kippur War lasted 18 days and was the largest and most intense conflict between the two sides. Israel suffered 2,656 deaths, over 7,200 wounded, and lost considerable equipment, more than triple the casualties of the Six-Day War. Arab forces incurred an estimated 8,000 to 18,000 deaths, over 30,000 wounded, and lost over 2,500 tanks and 400 aircraft. Consequences. Although the Arab states did not achieve a decisive military victory, the war altered the military balance in the Middle East and had profound political consequences. Arab states demonstrated unprecedented unity, with Gulf oil producers providing substantial economic support. Early battlefield successes shattered Israel's invincible myth, restoring Arab national pride. Additionally, the war forced the U.S., the Soviet Union, and other relevant states to adjust Middle East policies. The United States recognized that promoting peace between Israel and Arab states aligned with its strategic interests, creating conditions for resolving future conflicts. While Israel ultimately regained the initiative, the cost was immense. For a nation of just 3 million people, the high casualties and billions of dollars in war expenditures were a heavy burden. More importantly, the Yom Kippur War shattered the sense of complacency that had dominated Israeli society since 1967, undermining public confidence in leadership. Increasingly, Israelis realized that a hardline policy and military occupation could not guarantee security and that peace required addressing the legitimate demands of Arab states.